Welcome to Successful Parenting, where we, Jackie Rue and Robin Choquette, share practical skills for families to build resilience and healthy connections. As practicing professionals and parents ourselves, we hope this podcast is a resource for parents to grow, reflect, and learn more about themselves and their children. Our approach is simple, tangible, and most importantly, we lead with compassion for the integrity of the families we serve. This podcast should not be taken as medical advice and is intended for informational purposes only. We love our work, and we can't wait to watch families gain confidence and open themselves up to new ways of successful parenting.
Hello, Robin. How are you doing today?
I am good. Happy New Year to you, Jackie.
Wow, 2023. It's an exciting time. I'm excited for this new year.
Yeah, me too. I feel this rejuvenation. Well, maybe not rejuvenation. I don't know.
You know, it's interesting. I don't know if I told you, I had the opportunity a couple weeks ago to speak to a middle school, a large group of students on this topic, and we were talking about resiliency and managing stress. And it was interesting. We had about 500 sixth, seventh, and eighth graders, and they talked a lot about feeling they didn't know how to manage stress. They were really struggling with how to manage when things became difficult and uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to one student who said he feels like it's really hard when the expectation is to do well and be happy all the time. And it was interesting to hear his perspective. And I know we talk about this a lot. And as we're approaching a new semester of school and a lot of the children are starting to go back to school after break, I think this is a great topic to discuss right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. Think about the families, either they've already started or they're, as you said, they're getting prepared and they're heading back and they've got that first semester finished for most of them. How did that go for them? And I think for some parents, they're on edge and they're worried and they're concerned of, will we have a repeat of last semester? How can we change? What will happen? Or parents are feeling like, oh, we've got this. It's great. We're sliding through. We have nothing to worry about. And I think it is interesting because as we push through, and this is kind of when we think about resilience and grit and that pushing and continue that perseverance, how does that happen and staying motivated? So I agree. I think this is such a perfect topic for this time of year for our families listening.
Well, in full transparency, I'm kind of a people pleaser. And so for me, I have a hard time when others aren't happy, right? When I hear kids speaking about everyone expects us to be happy all the time, we really talk about, as a parent, how do we handle when our children are anything other than happy, right? If our children are anxious or they're sad or they're frustrated, as parents, do we have a tendency to kind of want them to be happy and try to make it better? Or do we allow them to really sit with their feelings? And I think for so many parents, they say that's a challenge, right? And so I can relate to that. And I think there's so much value in children learning and understanding that it's okay to be anything other than happy, and really teaching them that sitting with different feelings and allowing yourself to experience different feelings, there's a lot of value in that.
Right. I think I've mentioned this before of when someone says my child's anxious, I'll say, great, that's really going to help them in developing. One part of it is this resilience and grit, because it's that part of being able to be uncomfortable and managing that. And if your child is able to do that, then that bounce back, which is all about grit and resilience. I mean, what you're talking about is key in developing grit.
Well, and it's interesting too, because many parents will say, my child really struggles when they're frustrated. My child really struggles when things get tough. And I love what you just said, because that resilience and grit are two qualities that children need in order to overcome adversity, overcome and deal with difficult situations, right? And parents listening today, I think most parents would agree, one thing I want my child to have is that ability to work through difficult situations, because you're going to be able to accomplish so much. And also that confidence. When you look at confidence and self-esteem, it really ties to feeling and understanding that you can face challenges and work through difficult situations.
Right. And I agree with you. I think confidence is such a huge piece of it. I find sometimes people think of that as such a black and white thing. Either I have confidence or I don't. And that's one thing that I try to approach, especially with adolescents, to look at it kind of this whole piece and this whole picture. And when I even think about grit and resilience, I think that is a piece of that as well. It's not just one thing, right? When we're trying to on that path, there's a lot that influences it and a lot that can really interfere. And I think you do have to look, if you listeners, if you haven't, checked out Carol Dweck, I think you've got to check her growth mindset because that's all a part of this. Angela Duckworth, she talks a lot about grit, and these two doctors often get together and they've done a lot of research and talk together. And I think their work is so important. Character Lab is something that Angela Duckworth puts out on social media, and we follow them and we'll often share that stuff. So if you ever are interested, please check us out on social media. We're on all platforms and you will find Character Lab. And I think they have a lot of great information. But as you're talking about, Jackie, I'm thinking as parents, what is it that we do that can really help and what can we do that can really interfere? And I think often we can get very narrow focused. I know I can do that, right? And
yeah, for sure. I think we all can.
yeah, and we think it's just one path, and there's so much that influences that development and how it can be interfered. If we're not modeling it, if we don't allow them, as you said, I don't want someone to feel uncomfortable. I come in and make sure they succeed. And whatever it is that we have to kind of look at that. I go back to that Buddha saying there's more than one path to the top of the mountain. And I think it takes a lot of different ways to build and being able to be open. And where's my opportunity? Do I allow that to happen? Do I have the awareness when it's open?
I had several conversations with parents this week, and this is where it gets a little tricky, I think. And I don't know if you run into this, but I had a few conversations with parents, and parents set some new limits with their children. And some of the children were actually 16, 17 years old. And some of it involved doing things that could possibly, create discomfort for the child or even challenge the child in a new way, or set limits on things. And some of the children, one in particular, had huge reaction. Really, the child was beside himself, right? He was screaming, he was yelling, he was upset, he was just falling apart. And parents said, oh my gosh, what did we do? We set this new limit, or, we set this boundary. And some of it involved setting up some new accommodations in school. Some of it involved setting some limits around tech. Some of it involved the child going to school. Some of it involved the child going to a family engagement. When the kids had these huge reactions, anxiety, anger, frustration, the parents quickly jumped back and said, oh my gosh, we shouldn't have done this. And we talked about that. We talked about not being driven by the children's reaction, but by taking a step back and allowing the child, because sometimes when we do things different and children aren't used to limits and boundaries in that way, they're most likely going to have a big reaction. And I think as parents, that causes us to change what we're doing. Because again, we want the child to be happy. We want the child to be comfortable. But when we lead by wanting the child to be comfortable and happy, what that does to the child, and I always use the term, we avoid pain in the moment, but we cause long-term suffering, right? So when you look at development,
I like that.
Our children need to really work through that. And I think for so many parents, they're parenting out of fear rather than my goal is for this child to develop this resilience and grit. And so it's interesting that I think for many parents, that's what interferes with them in this topic.
Yeah. And it is. It's so important for the child to learn just to be in that discomfort, right? And I think one that makes it really difficult for parents is when the child has a big reaction, and that big reaction is intense sadness or feeling depressed. I think that's a difficult one for parents. A lot of times they want to come in as, well, my child's really sad and I don't want my child to be sad. And I can't tolerate that. And that is so important. I mean, we want them to be safe and we want them to be able to manage, but sadness is something you have to be able to be in and riding that wave, the beginning, middle, and an end.
100%. And, I like how you said that, because confidence and grit and resilience, they're not just traits that we're born with, we learn. And if there's skills that parents are concerned that their children don't have, how can we teach those through our parenting? And so often it's a challenge, but the more we can allow the child to face some of this, the more confident they're going to be and the better off they're going to be in the long run.
And, normalizing kind of what you're saying, they're going to be better in the long run. If we normalize that everybody experiences discomfort, and this is a very normal thing, everyone experiences sadness, everyone experiences anger or frustration, and being able to tolerate that and work through it, it's a big plus.
And I know you and I have talked about, when we were speaking to one group of parents, we talked about, even at dinner time, having everyone say, what's one thing that went well today? And what's one thing that was challenging for you? And allowing the child to know, almost praising the child for doing something that made them uncomfortable. We use the phrase all the time. We teach people to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And one mom said, I just view my child as so fragile. And we talked about that. How you view your child is going to impact your response. And if you view the child as fragile or shy or anxious, then you're going to parent in a different way when really these are skills that we're talking about. So rather than saying my child can't handle this or my child's shy or anxious, my child really could benefit from this skill. And how am I going to teach that in my parenting?
I go back to think about family time at Costco when Mia was talking about that. And one of the things, as she was saying that she didn't give her children those devices, was that she wanted them in some ways to be uncomfortable and them to spend time together. But in spending time together, there was some discomfort and finding those opportunities. And I think it's sometimes hard, but I think there are a lot of opportunities, from the language that we use, allowing them to be in distress. All of that is an important piece of this development.
We're finding that children are more sensitive, they're more reactive. And so we recognize now more than ever we need to work with these skills. And as parents ourselves, I often ask myself, how do I manage, my own discomfort? In particular, when my kids are struggling. And I think for so many parents, we ask parents this all the time. How do you manage your own discomfort when you recognize that your child is struggling? And is this more about me or is it more about them? And as you're listening, think about, when your child starts to struggle, do you tend to want to reassure and make them feel better? Or do you allow them to kind of work through it, just being more of a guide?
Or do you get angry when it becomes uncomfortable? And I think when we're feeling a lot of stress or chaos or pressure, I think that can come out as well. As you said, I think there's a lot of different ways that we respond. Having that awareness of how we respond, and then kind of having a plan in how do I help my child develop resilience and grit, needs to be pre-thought out and intentional. And then when it occurs, we'll have that in our back pocket to be able to recognize, oh, here's a great opportunity.
I was watching a documentary recently and I can't remember what it was called, but it stood out to me because it was about a therapist and a patient. And the patient was struggling with an eating disorder. And the patient was talking about how difficult things were and they can't, the patient, it was a young female and she said, I can't handle this. This is terrible. I'm just not going to be able to make it. And the therapist said, life is hard. Things are difficult, but I know you can do difficult things. And it stood out because that's something that we say often and saying to our kids, this is going to be really challenging. I never say to kids, it's going to be a great day. It's going to be wonderful. This may be really difficult for you, but I have confidence you can manage. And this came up too in a conversation I had with a parent. The child was texting the parent from school saying, pick me up, can't do it. And the parent kept texting and they had a lot of interchange. And I said to the parent, when you're doing that, what message are you sending? And so I often ask parents, think about what message you're sending through your responses. And so often, is it in line with kind of the goals you have for your parenting, or are you really sending a message that you don't think the child can handle it?
Yeah, those unspoken messages so often that we send when we don't recognize. You're absolutely right. And I think that is probably a huge piece of it when we talk about things that impact or interfere with the development of grit and resilience. If I keep coming in and saving you, that I'm saying, no, you can't do it and you need assistance. And that's so spot on.
And that goes in line with even setting limits with children. And whether it's video games, phone, or even the language they use. If your child has anxiety or your child has emotional issues, do you excuse some of the behavior because of that? There was a child that was screaming and yelling at the parent and very disrespectful. And I later asked the parent why the parent had chose to react in the way they did. And ultimately, the parent at that time did not really set limits. There was not a lot of accountability around the behavior. And the parent said, well, this child is just so anxious. And we talked about how children, when they're struggling with emotions and behaviors, they benefit from accountability structure because it helps them to feel safe. And so often, even when I'm talking to educators at schools, they say the same thing, that they hold kiddos accountable in a different way. I just don't know that that's always helpful.
Right. And I think it gets to people trying to meet where the person is. But if you hold them accountable of where they're reacting and their behavior, and they're really kind of melting down or they're responding in that way, you're not raising the bar and helping them to move up. You're making them comfortable by meeting them exactly where they are. And I think it's really important to meet them where they are and recognize where they are, but you can't set those expectations at where they are or even below it because they're anxious or because they're sad. We still need those, and those are so valuable. And I think it's such a great conversation, and it's been a lot of fun talking about resilience and grit. And I just love your perspective, Jackie. You bring a lot to it. I think some of the big things I took out of our conversation today is ways that, we can thrive despite challenges, adversity that we may have, normalizing things that are hard, looking at our language. I think all of those things are so important, kind of the big takeaways. What are the big takeaways for you?
I mean, I think just coming off so many conversations this last couple of weeks is allowing our children to be uncomfortable, maintaining expectations and holding them accountable despite their emotional state or accountability, but being consistent with.
Mm-hmm.
I think whenever as parents we do something different in our home or we set different expectations, it takes 2 weeks to develop a routine. And so I think even though the reactions may be huge in the beginning, I think as we stay consistent, again, we're avoiding pain in the moment, but we're causing long-term suffering if we don't. And
Mm-hmm.
when there's something we're trying to change, it takes time. And I know many parents are fearful and they're fearful of making it worse. But really, if you are feeling that way, seeking out help. But most children, in particular post-pandemic, do better with structure and consistency and accountability. And I think ultimately that's really what leads to grit and resilience. So I enjoyed this conversation today and I loved your perspective as well. And I hope this is helpful for many parents.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a great way to reflect and to think about it. And there's so many different pathways of this, and it's not one thing. But I think being able to be aware and having different tools and ways to think about it that we've talked about this morning.
Well, and you know what? Whenever I talk to kids, they agree with us, right?
Yeah.
So when you talk to them, this isn't just the adults saying it. Kids are saying they need structure and they need accountability and they want it because when they don't have it, they feel like people don't have a lot of faith. So this is good stuff. I hope you have a great day. I'm excited about a whole new year. We have so many things lined up. I mean,
Yes.
I'm excited what's to come. We got some surprises coming up for listeners. Stay tuned. We got a lot of great episodes coming.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jackie. Happy New Year to everyone, and stay safe. And hopefully you have an amazing day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for joining us, and make sure to subscribe and like us to catch our next episode, where we will take you on a journey to find new ways of successful parenting.